Learning at Objective 1811, understand and explain the preparation of government-wide financial statements. And this is extremely important. And this is where a lot of CPA exam questions are going to come up in government accounting. And this is definitely something you should be familiar with. Just because it's at the end of the chapter doesn't mean that it's not important. And the history here is that government-wide financial statements are something very, very new. In accounting, when we mean new, we mean like, it's only 40 years old. No, seriously, I think these are around about 20 years, but that's very new in accounting. Anyway, the thinking was that financial reporting of governmental units was sorely lacking. And I mean, we're not even reporting fixed assets and long-term liabilities because they're not recorded in funds. And so the GASB wanted to clean everything up so that there would be a single set of financial statements that users would be able to read and see from a big picture perspective what's going on. And part of this was that the FASB enforced accrual accounting on the entire government. So even though the governmental funds, use modified accrual, the government-wide financial statements need to use the full accrual basis, and they also need to include the information from that A, B, C, D, E, F, G, general capital asset, general long-term liability, general ledger group, that whole thing also needs to be put into there. And all the funds that use modified accrual are going to need to be converted into accrual accounting in order to do this. And GASB 34 says you have to do this. Now, governments can do whatever they want because they're the government. So a government needs to make a decision as to whether or not it would follow this GASB rule, because GASB is just an organization. It's just a group of people who make decisions, and adherence to it is voluntary. But a government can make a decision, either at the state or the local level, that they're going to follow GASB GAAP and report these government-wide financial statements. In New Jersey, it happens to be that the state of New Jersey does report government-wide financial statements in accordance with GASB GAAP, but counties and municipalities do not have to. If they choose to, I don't know any that do. If they choose to, that's great, but they don't have to. So there are some really big issues with this that make the accounting for this complicated, and that's probably one reason why the GASB hesitated to do this, why it wasn't done before. There's a lot of problems with the entity concept. If you remember, the entity concept says that we can take an entity and we can define what is inside the entity as what is outside the entity. That within a company, for example, some transactions are inside the entity and some are outside. If you pay tuition, then Seton Hall receives the money, and that transaction is within the entity. If I stop on my way to work in the morning and buy a cup of coffee, that's outside the entity because that's my personal money going into, that's my personal transaction with another entity. Government has a big problem in that it's not clear sometimes which entities are part of the government and which entities are not. What organizations compose the reporting entities? So there's no question that the primary government itself is going to be part of the reporting entity. But there are going to be two other categories, what's called a component unit and an organization. So a component unit would be one for which the primary government is financially accountable. We'll talk about what that is. And then an organization where there's a significant relationship with the primary government. In other words, you may have an organization that is partially run by the government and partially run, say, by, it may be a not-for-profit organization, but it acts as a tool of the government, and therefore it would be included in. And we'll talk about the criteria. So what do we mean here? A component unit needs to be financially accountable. What do we mean by financially accountable? And this is done from a governance perspective. You have financial accountability if most of the board members are appointed by the government in some way. Now, it could also exist if the organization is separately elected or appointed board, but depends on the primary government for financial resources that it needs. So this could come from two places. It could either come from a governance perspective, where most of the board comes from is appointed by the government, or it could also be a situation where the organization depends on money from the local government in order to do its job. So this would have to be a significant portion of their operations. If it was a relatively small portion, then it wouldn't be. And you'd be surprised within state and local government how many organizations rely upon the local government to do what they do. And then we have the organizations. That's category 3. So this is a little stickier. And these would be legally separate entities where the government is not financially accountable for them. And if they meet the 3 criteria, even though they're legally separate, then they can be construed as a component unit of the primary government, and they would need to be included in the government-wide financial statements. I'm not using the word consolidated. I could, I guess, because it's kind of a consolidation, you'll see. So the 3 criteria are that resources of the separate organization are held for the benefit of the primary government, its component units, or the persons serviced by the primary government or its component units, and primary government or its component units are entitled to or can use a majority of the economic resources of the separate organization. And 3, the economic resources of the separate organization that primary government and its component units can use are significant to the primary government. So those are the 3 criteria. And we've gone over 3 issues so far. The first was, again, what organizations. The second was just to talk about what financial accountability was. The third was the organizations that we include. And the fourth one is a little different. How should we report these financial results? And should there be a discrete presentation in separate columns? Or should we combine everything into a single set of results? And you'll see that there are some things that we present separately and some things that we blend together. So we have the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, extremely important for the CPA exam. And we have what we call government-wide financial statements and then fund-based statements. The government-wide financial statements would be a statement of net position, which is like a balance sheet, and a statement of activities, which is like an income statement. And we're also going to present fund-based financial statements so people will know what's going on. So here's a list from the book of all the different sections. And what I'm posting to Blackboard is an actual CAFR for a city in Texas, city of Round Rock, I usually do. And this will show you a real life CAFR, and it pays to go through this to understand what's going on. And you can see when you look at it that it's kind of modeled on a 10K. So you're going to start off with an independent auditor's report, and then you're actually going to have a manager's discussion and analysis. It's required. And then you're going to have these government-wide financial statements that we've been talking about, a statement of net position, which is like a balance sheet, and a statement of activities. We'll look at those. We'll look at examples, and then again, you want to scroll through the Round Rock, Texas one and take a look at it. Then we have our fund-based financial statements. So we'll have governmental funds for them grouped together separately, depending on the criteria, the 10% and 5% rules. We'll have balance sheet, statement of revenues, expenditures, changes in fund balance, and reconciliation schedules, reconciling the fund-based financial statements to the government-wide. Then we'll have proprietary funds, a statement of net position, revenues, expenses, changes in fund balance, and statement of cash flows. Then we'll have fiduciary funds also, statement of fiduciary position, statement of changes in fiduciary position, notice, and we got to talk about agency funds in a few minutes, notes to the financial statements, and then required supplementary information. And then there'll be sections 3 and 4. Section 3 will have combining individual fund financial statements. It kind of shows you a consolidation from the fund-based financial statements to the government-wide. And Section 4 are all kind of important statistics that governments need to provide about their performance. So looking at this in a little more details, there's two government-wide, I really think there should be a hyphen there, government-wide financial statements, a statement of net position, and this is going to include almost everything from all of the funds, plus your general capital assets, general long-term liabilities from that, that general ledger account group, and a statement of activities like a P&L, including depreciation. Everything is going to be done the way using the real accrual system. So you're on the economic resource management measurement focus. What that means is that we're trying to account for everything that the government does within what we've defined to be the government to be. So you have the real accrual basis of accounting here. And we exclude fiduciary activities because their resources aren't available to support government programs. In other words, it's interesting because we would include various organizations and component units in the government financial statements, government-wide, but fiduciary activities would be excluded because we don't have access to their resources. Now, the statement of net position, like the balance sheet, is going to report all the assets and all the liabilities, even if they weren't included in the funds. So net position will have three categories: invested in capital assets net of related debt, restricted and unrestricted. We've talked about this. This is similar to the categories that I talked about in an earlier video here for this chapter. And we eliminate all the interfund balances because when you consolidate, the due tos and due froms are going to be eliminated. So this is what a government-wide statement of net position, like a balance sheet, is going to look like. So here you can see assets of governmental activities versus business type activities. And again, governmental activities would be the government funds. Business type activities would be your proprietary funds. And you have assets, liabilities, what's called deferred inflows of resources, and then net position. It's interesting, deferred inflows of resources is kind of like other comprehensive income, in case you're wondering, what is that? It's kind of like other comprehensive income. So you can see here that there's an increase in fair value of hedging derivatives, and it hasn't yet hit the P&L, so it's just placed in that section. And here you can see government-wide statement of activities like a P&L, and we would have program revenues, we would have expenses here on first, followed by program revenues, and then net expenses, revenue and changes. This is kind of your net income. And we split it out into governmental versus business activities. Likewise here. Governmental is across the top, and business type activities are down here. There are different rows for each type of activities, and oftentimes these come from different funds. So the format here is a little strange, but you're basically going to be showing income in this category, in this column right here, and then it'll be broken out into governmental versus business type in these two columns, broken out into revenues and expenses here. And then here you can see these are listings of various expenses, and here are some of the revenues from the governmental activities, taxes and so on. So the format here is kind of strange of how they set it up, but it's really a practical format that's focused on delivering the information that's needed.